Welcome, very, very warm welcome to all of you. I'm the president here at Westminster, delighted to welcome all of you and the Community Foundation, Ron Lieber, here to our campus this evening. This is a real pleasure for us, not only because the Community Foundation is such a wonderful partner to us, but also to have an opportunity to have all of you who have been so generous and visionary in this community collected here for this occasion is a real privilege for us. And so we're really, really grateful to have an opportunity to host this event and to be a part of it. I would tell you that since it was announced and as we've gotten a little closer, my phone has been buzzing with all of your children who are pretty sure you're going to come home and change everything that you've been doing with them over all these many years. I'm not offering them any reassurances at all. So they're fair game for you with whatever insights that you gain this evening and whatever, all the things I'm sure that we're going to hear. This program this evening aligns very nicely with, I'm changing someone's slides up here, aligns very nicely with our mission and things that we are working on in concert with and hand in hand with the Community Foundation through our Glenn Institute. We are very much aligned with the idea that our students need to have a great deal of ambition for themselves personally and professionally, but they need to match that ambition with their ambition to serve others. They need to match or exceed their ambition for themselves with their ambition to service. And that's very much what we're all about. One of the things that makes this gathering so appealing and so attractive and offering this welcome to you all such a privilege for us is that we know that's where you are, not only with your own children, but with children across our city as well. And so this fits neatly into what we're all about, and we're very, very eager and excited to hear what Ron has to tell us. With that, I'm going to hand off to our esteemed executive, Alicia, for some other words of welcome and introduction. Again, thank you all very much for being here at Westminster.
Keith, thank you, and thank you, Jerry, and everybody at the Westminster family for being so welcoming to those of us with the Community Foundation. There are so many connections between the Community Foundation and Westminster. We share many families in common. In addition, we have 2 alums from Westminster on our staff. And many of our donors have made significant contributions here. When you look out at the Adams Gate, that is in honor of the daughter of one of the donors of the Community Foundation. And of course, we share Tom Glenn, who is the founder of the Glenn Institute, in common as a donor. So there's lots of very deep connections here. And when Kevin Salwin suggested that we have Ron Lieber, this really seemed like the right place to do it because of the work of the Glenn Institute and the commitment they have to raising philanthropic children on this campus. We work with families all the time that are making these same decisions that Ron's going to talk about today, that are thinking about how much is enough, what do we set aside for philanthropy, how can we as a family begin to make philanthropic decisions together, and that's what we exist for. We exist to connect passion with purpose. And by doing that, we do it with families, and we have lots of skilled philanthropic advisors whose skills are about bringing families together and thinking about those philanthropic decisions and how families can work together better. We are families' philanthropic GPS. We don't tell people where to go, but we listen very carefully and try to help guide people, just like the GPS system does, to a solution that really works for them as a family. The Community Foundation has thrived in this community over the years. Currently, we have assets of about $930 million, which is a lot of money. But it really is the community's endowment. And it represents over 650 donors who've set up funds with the foundation as a way to do their philanthropic giving and as a way to give back to this community that has meant so much to them. We really are about engaging philanthropists, engaging their families, helping people to know what's happening in the community through all the ways that we have worked through the community. We're about strengthening nonprofits. We have a whole suite of services and a suite of grant-making things that we offer nonprofits to help them become strong and effective and to really be the best that they can be. So when donors make grants, they're making them to organizations that really have a strength. We're also about advancing public will. There's some big, hairy, audacious problems in this community that really take a lot of people working together to make those, to come up with solutions. And that's where the Community Foundation can be a fulcrum in there, working with other funders and with donors and with others and making that happen. And we ourselves try to practice organizational excellence. We want to be the best that we can be. Tonight in this audience are many of our donors, and we thank you for being here. There's many familiar faces and lots of new faces. And also among us are a number of the professional advisors that we work with, financial advisors and others who work with donors, some of whom have brought people to be here with us this evening. Our work with professional advisors is very key to the work of the Community Foundation. 80% of all the new funds that come to the Community Foundation come through our work with professional advisors because they can continue to manage and invest those funds, and we can be partners with them in helping their clients to meet their philanthropic goals. So I really want you to know that we stand ready in any way, if you are a donor, if you're not a donor, to really help you to meet those philanthropic goals that you set for yourself. We have lots of activities that are happening for our donors. One of the best, in my opinion, is Planet Philanthropy, which is for the children and grandchildren of donors. That'll be held in August. And in September, we're going to have a focus on education and really looking at the changing suburban demographics and do a site visit to a number of organizations in North Fulton County, Sandy Springs, and really look deeply there and see what's happening in that community. And then we also, in July, earlier than that, we're going to have our investment council come and talk about what's happening in the investment world. So if I could ask the staff of the Community Foundation to raise their hand so you can see where they are. Thank you all very much. And please, if afterwards, when you pick up your copy of Ron Lieber's book, pick up materials about the foundation, and feel free at any time to ask a staff member any question. And we're also very pleased tonight to have some of our board members here, to have Joan Solwin here, to have Siobhan Hines, Chip Patterson. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce the inimitable Kevin Solwin, who is a donor. He and his wife Joan and their two children, Hannah and Joseph, have a fund, donor advised fund at the Community Foundation. And many of you probably are familiar with them because they were the authors of a book called The Power of Half, where they made some very serious philanthropic decisions of their own. And we are very fortunate that Ron Lieber is a friend of Kevin's, and that's how we came to know about Ron and his book. And so it's so appropriate that Kevin be the one to introduce Ron tonight. Kevin.
Obviously, this mic was already preset for Lieber, not for me. Hang on a sec. Does anybody have a phone book I can stand on? Thanks, Alicia, for a nice introduction. When I had lunch with Ron today, first of all, I had to introduce him to an Atlanta legend, so I took him to Fox Brothers for lunch. So if he has heartburn in the middle of this, you can blame me. Is there anything special you want me to talk about in your introduction? And so he said, no, surprise me. So that's really a dangerous thing to say to me. But so the one thing I will tell you is, it's a little known fact, actually, that Ron has posed as the body double for the Vanity Fair cover of Caitlyn Jenner. So, it's actually really appropriate that we're, sorry. You're not going to look at him the same, are you? It's actually really appropriate that we're here in a school setting. You know, my son is an alum here, 2013 grad, and we have so much respect for Westminster. Ron and I were talking about schools today, and particularly schools in downtown Brooklyn. And he referred to one school in a way that I just loved. It's a very, very progressive school, and he said that the grads of that school go one of two places, either to Brown or to rehab. So I thought, you know, these are the kinds of decisions we make as parents, right? I did want to tell just one story that kind of aligns with what Ron's going to be talking about tonight, because it actually comes back to the book that Hannah and I wrote. And at one point, a mom in Chicago came up to me and she said, I just wanted to tell you the story. You know, you guys sold your house, moved into one half the size. And I just want to tell you, I read your book, And I decided to do a similar thing. And I said, really? So tell me why. And she said, I adopted a daughter from Vietnam. And as I raised this child, and she got into in this really affluent suburb of Chicago on the North Shore, she said, despite how much I wanted to push this kid's values, she would come home every day and ask about the latest technology or the newest fashion or what the other kids were wearing in school. And this mother said a sentence to me that I will never forget. She said, I thought right then that I was ruining this child, that she had come over from Vietnam innocent, and that living in this environment was ruining this child. And I think about that tonight because that's like an extreme version of all of our nightmares. We want to bring our children into this world, teach them great value. Not great consumers, but great citizens. And that's exactly the topic that you're going to hear lots about tonight, and I'm really excited about Ron. So just a little bit about his bio so you'll know who you're listening to tonight. Ron has been the Your Money columnist for the New York Times since 2008. In 2011, he won a Loeb Award, which is the highest award in business journalism, for a series of columns on student loans. This is all in the personal finance category. So on Saturday, if you haven't picked up the Saturday New York Times, pick it up. It's good stuff. Before coming to the Times, he wrote the Green Thumb column for the Wall Street Journal's Money and Investing section and was part of the team at the paper's of the startup of the personal journal section for the Wall Street Journal. That's where Ron and I first started working together. That's where we first got to know each other, what we refer to as the good old days, which is a euphemism for pre-Murdoch. Anyway, I can go through his whole bio, but he's from Chicago. He went to Amherst. He lives in Brooklyn with his amazing wife, Jodi Kantor, who is also a New York Times reporter and a best-selling author of the book, The Obamas. He has a 9-year-old daughter who does not go to the Browner Rehab School, but goes to a different school. He has another child on the way, which is totally awesome. And he's doing what we are all doing, which is trying to raise them to be great human beings. Please welcome my friend, Ron Lieber.
You can put the mic back. I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to use this one. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Thank you, Kevin. If any of you in this crowd have not read the book about Kevin and Joan and Hannah and Joseph, forget mine. Go out and read theirs first. It was probably the single most inspiring thing I read and the single most inspiring story that I ran into throughout my half-decade of reporting on this topic. I know it will move you as much as it moved me. So, I grew up in Chicago. I went to a school a lot like this one, was a K-12 lifer. It did not ruin me. In fact, it made me who and what I am. And I want to tell you a little bit about how this kid with all that hair grew up to be this guy who was obsessed with money and feelings and emotions and behavior and how we talk about these things. And it goes back to right around then when I was about 11 years old. We were full payers at the Francis Parker School in Chicago. Had a brother and sister who were twins, 5 years younger than me. And then a couple of things happened that really shook things up in my family. First of all, my parents got divorced. If any of you have been through that, you know that it can be a difficult thing financially in addition to emotionally. You take one household, you turn it into two. Often your standard of living declines. That was the case for us. But then one of my parents lost their job. It was about 2 years until full employment was regained, and really 10 or 15 years until we were back where we had been financially before the divorce and before the job loss. And my siblings and I went on financial aid right away at Parker. It was seamless, incredible, really, the way that the community wrapped their arms around us. I didn't even know that it had happened until 12 months later.
So we were lucky. We were not evicted from this community that we had grown to love. But 4 years later, it was time for me to go to college, and it was clear that we did not have anywhere near enough money to write a check for the places that I wanted to go. And so my mother started asking around, and somebody slipped her a piece of paper, telephone number for a guy named Roger Kester. Now, this was before everybody had like 7 consultants apiece on speed dial for their children. So we weren't quite sure about this, but we called this number suburban Chicago, and it turns out Roger Kester was the associate director of financial aid at Northwestern University in Evanston. And here's what Roger was doing every day at 5:01 p.m. after his colleagues had left for the night. He would call in a local family. You were told to show up at this address and come in through the side door with $45 in cash. So you show up at this door with the $45 in cash. You put it on Roger's desk, and he would close the door and then explain all of the secrets of the financial aid system to you. Where to put which number on the FAFSA form so that you appeared as needy as possible without subverting the process or lying. And Roger was right. It worked. I got into Amherst College early decision, and I got an incredible financial aid package. It was what allowed me to get through there in 4 years without having to work, 40 hours a week on top of my classes. I graduated with less than $10,000 in student loan debt, which wasn't very much even back then, and was really miraculous. And I learned a couple of things from that experience. First of all, the grown-up world is filled with complex systems involving money, and they are made to be hacked legally. Roger wouldn't have met with us if I had been applying to Northwestern, but because I wasn't, he was happy to take our $45 and help. It turns out that there are a lot of grown-ups in the world who are willing to help you fix or work your way through certain complicated financial lessons and systems, and that was a great lesson for me to learn. But the more important thing that I learned from that experience was from the mere fact that my mother took me there in the first place. She could have left me at home. She could have been ashamed of the financial situation that we were in. She could have attempted to shield me from the reality of our situation, sort of left me at home to do my math homework and not to worry about this stuff. But that approach, those approaches, wouldn't have made any sense to her. It was my future we were talking about. My FAFSA, my application, my student loan debt, potentially. She saw no reason why I shouldn't be sitting there in the front row, there with her and Roger, talking it over. And so that's what she did. That's what she continued to do, because each year in the fall, she would fly out to Amherst at a not small expense, and she and I and the Dean of Financial Aid would sit down and haggle. They would have made us an offer for the year, and we would ask for $1,000 more or $2,000 more, and quite often we met at least halfway. So that, too, was formative, although I didn't really think much about it until 15 years later. I was running the gauntlet at the Wall Street Journal, trying to get hired to help launch this new consumer news section that the Journal was putting together for the first time. And the editors there asked me all sorts of questions about my consumer biography. They wanted to know what was my experience as a consumer in the world, not so much as a reporter, but as a consumer, because they wanted people who thought that way. And in that moment, I remembered the story of Roger and beating the system and all of these things. And so I told them about that, and I told them about how I spent the 1990s exploiting every last loophole of the frequent flyer miles system, which was a big hobby of mine in the 90s. It still is to a lesser extent today. And they said, Ron, what you don't understand about yourself, about the things that you've been best at in journalism, but also the things that you're good at in life, is that your beat, your area of coverage, your beat in journalism, but also your beat in life is beating the system. And the minute they said that to me, all these doors and windows started flying open in my head. And pretty soon, I was the guy at the Wall Street Journal who was writing the stories about how to return all of your wedding gifts for cash. You all laugh, but I can't be the only one in here who did that, right? Yeah, okay, you could admit it to me afterwards. If you don't want to raise your hand now, I understand. Anyway, a couple of years went by. The Journal realized that what I was doing was also personal finance, just as much as all of the stocks and bonds and markets coverage that they've been running for years. And so when they started the Saturday newspaper in 2005, they gave me a column. I even had one of those funny dot drawings on the cover of the C section. Not long after that, the New York Times noticed what I was up to, and they hired me away. So there I was, 30-something years old, on top of the world, right? Or so I thought. I had it all figured out. I had this New York Times column, feeling very fancy. And then I became a parent. And as many of you in this room know, there are a few things that shake up your worldview more than that. And quite quickly, like really by the time she was 3 years old, our daughter started asking us a series of really intense questions about money. About who had more and who had less and what we had and why we didn't have a summer house. And she also wanted to know why in our third-floor apartment in Brooklyn, we did not have a basement filled with toys all our own like her cousin in New Jersey. And when she asked me these things, I was stumped. I played Dr. Money in the newspaper every week, and I'm supposed to have all the answers, at least all the answers that kids might ask. But her question stopped me cold. And what I realized was that the questions cut me to my core, in part because they were money questions that kind of got to the very fundamental choices we had made about how we chose to live our lives and what we chose to do for a living. And those were hard things to explain to ourselves, to articulate out loud to anyone, let alone to a 3-year-old. But these parenting questions, the big cosmic stumper ones, also felt really important, really vital, right? These kids are our flesh and blood, or we have taken them in and made them our own. We want to imprint them with all of our best qualities and none of our bad ones. And so in an effort to figure out what the right answers were, I do what I normally do now when I don't know the answer to a big cosmic question, and I ask the internet. I started taking these questions that I was hearing and parents of older kids, put them on a blog on the New York Times website, came up with these sort of rough drafts of answers, and then I asked readers to come in and help me improve them. After a while, we had some pretty good scripts for people to use, when their kids were asking them these questions and they found themselves stumped. Well, some parents in the community in and around New York City started to notice what I was doing, and right around the time that the Occupy protests started, all of the conversations about inequality that were going on in the external world, well, they were starting to come into schools, too. These parents called me up and they said, Ron, we've got a problem here. All of the people with more than average in our community are starting to feel demonized. Other parents, older students, teachers, administrators are saying, you know what, you probably should be toning it down right about now. The birthday parties need to be a little less extravagant. The kids should not be driving fancy cars or taking taxis or town car services to school. The newest iPhones probably ought to be left at home. And it would really be better if they're not talking about the fancy place they went on vacation. That did not feel very good to those families. They felt like they were having to apologize, not just for what they had, but who they were. And the people with less than average, they didn't like it either, because they were having their noses rubbed in everybody else's affluence at a time when a lot of people were really hurting. And they especially didn't like the questions that were coming home from their kids, who were looking at them and saying, I don't understand why you decided to be a teacher or a social worker or a journalist, God forbid, when you could have been a law firm partner, an investment banker, or a businessman. And then we would have a house on the lake or a ski place like my friends do. And the schools wondered, well, the parents wondered, why aren't the schools doing anything to answer these questions or lead these conversations? To me, the answer there was pretty simple. I mean, the schools are, up to their ears trying to sort of sort the diversity questions out and to put in thoughtful curriculums. But most of those diversity conversations at schools like these are about race, sexual orientation. They're not really about social class. And I understand why. In a community like this one, it's hard to admit that everybody who can afford to pay full freight for one kid, let alone two, and that's usually 60, 70, 80% of the community, if you can afford to pay those rates, you are probably in the 1% or close to it, or you've got relatives who are writing the checks. And it's difficult for us, for me as someone who sends my daughter to a school like that and is a graduate of one himself, to admit that, to stand up here and say it. But it's a fact, right? We've chosen to send our kids to these kinds of communities, and these are the people, the families that they're surrounded with. So I understand why it's an uncomfortable thing for schools to talk about. But these parents wanted to have the conversation. It was in the air. The kids were asking about it. They said, Ron, you've been writing about this stuff in the newspaper. Why don't you come in and set everybody straight? So I didn't know what to say, except I knew I should say yes, because these felt like fundamentally new challenges to me. And as somebody who's constantly looking for new things to talk about, new things to write about, I'm always looking for the new challenges in the world of money. And so as a sort of thought exercise, I tried to ask myself what all these people had in common, right? And I said, all right, well, what's the single worst word that somebody could use to describe my child that would be the biggest indictment of me as a parent? First thing that popped into my head was spoiled. And I think the reason why that was because spoiled is a passive verb. Spoiled by whom? Spoiled by you, by me, by us, because they're not born that way. They're made, and they're usually made that way by their parents. I asked my mom that question, too, just to see. After going to friends and people on Facebook, I heard lots of answers other than spoiled. People don't want their kids to be mean, and people don't want their kids to be racist. But I went to her just for some advice and said, Mom, what's the single worst word that people could use to describe the three of us that would be the worst indictment of you as a parent? She looked at me with great alarm and she said, average. This is what you get when you look up Jewish mother in Wikipedia. She was the only person who said that. About half the people I asked said spoiled. And so I thought, okay, well, if that's what we're trying to solve for, then what's the opposite of spoiled? And I didn't really know at first. If you look in the thesaurus, you see words like fresh, which is useful for produce and meat, but not for children. So I tried to make a list of all the values and virtues and character traits that add up to the sort of grounded kids that we all want to raise and push out into the world. Things like modesty and prudence and thrift and patience and generosity, graciousness, perspective and curiosity about the world, and perseverance and grit and a good work ethic. And I looked at that list that I made for myself and I thought, you can use money to teach every single one of those things. So what if, rather than allowing ourselves to be stumped by these money questions, by assuming that the answers and the conversations that they lead to are somehow impolitic or impolite or age inappropriate, what if we did the inverse? What if we embraced every single one of those questions and used the answers and our conversations about them to steer our families on years-long conversations, rituals even, around saving and spending and giving that lead directly to each and every one of those things and more? What if we did that instead? And so what the opposite of spoiled is, more than anything else, is a sort of generational manifesto. It's a promise to our children that we will do better at these money conversations than our parents did. So I don't know about you, but I have a distinct, strong recollection of asking all sorts of intense money questions of my parents at all ages. And more often than not, the answer went something like this: that is none of your business. How many of you recall hearing something like that when you asked money questions growing up? Yeah, inevitably, right? It's at least half the room. So I'm here to tell you tonight that that's really not the best answer. First of all, it's not true. I think for the most part, we want to avoid lying to our children. And I think that if they live in the household, they're part of the family business. Its business is their business. The revenues and the expenses of the household definitely impact them, so it is only natural that they will ask. But the other reason I really don't like the none of your business response is that it effectively shuts down this line of inquiry. It says to kids that this thing that's really powerful and mysterious, that inspires your curiosity, that sort of lights the fire of intrigue under you is totally and completely off limits in this household and in this family. I just don't think that that's the kind of message we want to be sending to kids, to be shutting down categories of conversation about really important stuff categorically and forever. The other problem with it is that if you do that enough, right, in one topic, in other areas of importance where you really hope they will come to you to talk, things like sex or drugs or mental health, they'll think those are too big and scary and grown up to talk to you about at all, right? And so they'll take their questions to their friends or the playground or the internet, and they'll ask Google. Pretty soon they'll be Googling your address and getting the Zillow information for the value of your home. I mean, they have all sorts of ways of finding things out. And so, I think we want to leave those lines of communication open. So if you're looking for a ready-made answer, for kids just about of all ages who come to you with really pressing questions. Maybe they want to know how much money you make, or what you pay the babysitter, or how much your house is worth. You can look right back at them and respond with another question. Why do you ask? And it's not an accusation, right? Why do you ask? It's meant to convey that we honor their curiosity, that we want to give them a real and true and an age-appropriate answer. But first, we want to know where the inquiry is coming from. Because with the younger ones, and even some of the older ones, well into their teens, if they're asking for a number, they're asking about a relatively big number, they don't have the context for the answer, right? So they're not asking because they want to know or because they want to rank you against everybody else's number, because they don't have everybody else's number. They're asking for some other reason, and quite often, the question is coming from a place of anxiety, right? They have overheard the two grown-ups in the house having a fight about money. Or they've overheard a single parent on the phone with a financial advisor, and they think they're rich. Or a parent on the phone with a creditor, and they think they're poor. Or they've gotten into your mail, right? They've looked at your tax returns. I was one of those kids who read the tax returns in my parents' desk. I imagine some of you were like that too. You don't have to admit it. I won't ask you to raise your hand. And when they can learn to read, right? So, God help you, right? So, the stuff in the newspaper will inspire all sorts of questions. They see things on billboards. They read the signs that homeless people are carrying. They're going to have a lot of questions for you. And I think it is our job to answer them. But we can't begin to get at the real nature of the inquiry until we know why they're asking. And quite often, we can divert the conversation away from the number that they think they're asking for to address the source of the anxiety, whatever it is, and make them feel better without necessarily giving them a big number that they're not going to understand. I also like why do you ask as a response in other difficult or complicated areas of inquiry too. Here I think about my friend Christy, who was sitting in her West Village living room a couple of years ago in New York City with her father, who sort of comes to New York to see his grandson under protest. He does not approve of New York City at all. And so they're sitting there one day having a conversation, Christy and her father, and Gus, the 7-year-old grandson, walks into the room. He looks at the two of them and sort of pulls himself up to his full height. He looks them in the eye and he says, "When are we going to start having some more sex around here?" So Christy had never talked about sex before with her dad, let alone with her son. And so she proceeds along this sort of, awkward rendition of the birds and the bees. She didn't have "why do you ask" in her arsenal yet. And it became very clear by the look in her son's eyes that he did not want to have sex at all. Not with his mother, not with his grandfather, not with anyone. It was only days later that Christy got to the bottom of where that question had come from. And it turned out that Gus had stolen a couple of minutes in front of a Family Guy episode on television. And it was there that he realized that if you ask, if you talk about sex in just the right way, at just the right moment in a conversation, the laugh track will explode. Right? So that's why do you ask. It's a terrific tool for all questions that kids will ask you. All right, so these are the 3 jars. Pretty simple concept. You use them for allowance. I'm a big believer in allowance. I think money is a tool for learning the same way that books and musical instruments and art supplies are. I think kids should get allowance starting at 6 or 7 or 8. I always get a lot of questions about how much they should get. I try not to be sort of cornered into giving a specific answer. To me, it's more of a philosophy. I think we want them to have just enough to be able to get a few things that they want, but not so much that they don't have to make a bunch of really hard choices. Because that's what grown-ups do. They make trade-offs, right? And that's what we want to teach them to do, however much money we allow them to have and whatever it is that we require them to pay with their own money. Dividing the allowance equally for kids, between the 3 jars is also, I think, a good foundational tool. I mean, this is what grown-ups do, after all, right? We spend hopefully no more than 75 or 80% of what we make. We save a good chunk of the rest for retirement or for college tuition, and then the rest we put in our donor-advised fund, the Atlanta Community Foundation, or whatever it is that you do with it. So it's good for kids to get in that habit too. This is part of learning to use money. But I also like the fact that the jars are a stand-in for those values and virtues and character traits we were talking about before, right? Thrift and modesty and prudence. That's what we do when we spend, or what we should be doing, right? And those aren't euphemisms for being cheap. I'm actually a big believer in spending as much as you possibly can on the things that make you happiest, as long as it's not putting you into any kind of debt. There's a lot of great science out there now that shows us that spending money on experiences, particularly experiences that we share with people that we love, people that we cherish, this is the best way to spend money. It delivers the longest term kind of hit of happiness. This is a great thing for adults to learn to practice, and I think eventually kids figure it out too. Doing stuff is better than having stuff. And along the way, through 10 or 12 years of allowance training, we want to try and sort of steer them towards that. So that's the practice with spending. Saving is all about patience and delayed gratification in a world that conspires against waiting in children. I'm sure many of you remember having to wait to use the phone in your house. Right? Siblings were ahead of you in line. You sort of clamored for a private line. It was a really big deal when your first friend got one. Right? This was like a big deal 20 or 30 years ago. I have strong memories of going to Blockbuster or the local video store and not being able to get the first release for weeks. And you put yourself on a paper list, and they would call you, but maybe you didn't have an answering machine yet. And there was literally no way to get the good movies. Now, these kids turn 11 or 12, and we hand them a private line that has the ability to watch whatever movie they want. I mean, it's insane, right? These kids don't have to watch commercials during the television shows if they don't want to. We can buy our way to the front of the line at most theme parks. There's not much waiting that goes on in their lives anymore unless they're on 75 at rush hour. Then they have to wait. But we can make them wait. We can teach them to wait. By virtue of calibrating the allowance just so, we can get them to a point where the things that they want, some of the things that they want, we make them pay for it, and they do it over time by saving. This is what grown-ups do. You don't get to retire unless you've been patient for 40 or 50 years in most cases, and we want our kids to be ready to do that too. So saving, it's the foundation for patience. And giving, we know all about giving in this room. Giving is, the give jar is all about generosity and gratitude. Quite often parents will ask me, well, how should I explain the concept of giving money away to kids who have never done it before? And my response is this. The give jar is a terrific opportunity to teach kids about your family's history of being helped. Almost every family has one. For my family, I got probably $100,000 in scholarship money between middle school and high school and college, and that was in 1986 to 1993 dollars. My wife is the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. Her grandparents literally ran across Europe before they were rounded up and thrown in labor camps. And when they were finally liberated and they made it to the United States, there was a line of people already in New York who were waiting to help them. So our daughter knows all about that history, and she knows that it's now an expectation that because we're in a better place in our lives ourselves, it's our job to help. So, your family may be different. Yours may be a hardscrabble immigrant tale, or maybe yours is a story of slavery to freedom. Maybe you've been on unemployment insurance recently, you got help from the government, or maybe you're a survivor of premenopausal breast cancer like my mom is, and the only reason you're walking around to be able to parent and grandparent now is because somebody donated a lot of money 10 or 20 years ago to make sure that more women would continue to be able to walk and parent and work and give. Just about every one of us has some history of being helped in our family, and I think this is a prime opportunity to teach it to our kids. All right, so I spent a lot of time during the reporting of the opposites of spoiled reminding myself of what kids are actually capable of at young ages. I think we've forgotten some of this in our increasingly urban, suburban lives, where a lot of the things that kids used to do themselves as chores are outsourced to other people. I know we do it in my house, in our neighborhood. I'm sure some of you have this experience too. I'm actually a big believer in chores. I don't actually think we should pay kids for chores. I think kids should get their allowance with an expectation that they spend it and save it and give it responsibly, but I don't think it should be connected with the completion of tasks, mostly for a practical reason, right? Because if that's the deal you make, there will come a point when they decide that they have enough money, thank you very much, and then they're not going to do any more chores. And then you're in a little bit of a negotiation pickle. Much better to say to them, look, this is the way it is. We do these things in our house because we love one another. And we care about having a hospitable living environment, and because it's important for you to learn to do them. And so often parents will accuse me of being a softie, right? For letting kids have the money without any expectation that they have to do anything for it. But I still think chores are incredibly important. Kids should do a lot more chores, and they are capable of a lot more than we think they are. And again, just to remind myself of that, I decided to go and hang out with a bunch of farm families. Because there, the kids still do work at incredibly young ages, and they do real substantial things. Is there anybody here who grew up on a dairy farm? All right, so you know the story, right? The milk has to be gotten from the cows. Like every day, twice a day, the cows get sick, the milk goes to waste. And what's the other thing the cows make that you have to deal with each and every day? Exactly, the other thing that comes out of the cows. Yeah, it turns out that the inspectors will shut you down if you are not careful with that manure. So the Smith family, northern Utah on the border of Idaho, they have about 1,800 head of dairy cattle. 8 boys in the Smith family. Zebediah Smith, age 5, is the youngest of them. And the day he turned 5, he was put to work, and he was immediately promoted to tractor driver. And this is how it works there, right? Zeb's put up on top of the big old tractor, and they put the thing in gear. Zeb's job is to steer it and make sure it goes straight. Right, so off it goes at ½ mile an hour down the rows of calf pens. And behind Zeb, there's the 7-year-old brother and the 9-year-old brother, and they are taking the bottles out of the back of the tractor, putting them in the calf pens so the calves can drink up and down the rows. Those bottles have been filled by the 11-year-old brother and the 13-year-old brother back in the barn with the milk that the 15-year-old brother and the 17-year-old brother got from the cows by operating the milking machinery. And this goes on every day, twice a day, 6 days a week. They take Sundays off. That's not Zeb's only job. That gun that you see him holding there is part of his work. So you know about the birds, right? The birds on a dairy farm are a menace, right? They harass the cows, they spread disease. You do not want the birds around. So Zeb's job is to make sure that those birds are really scared of him. When he cocks that weapon and that noise, before he even starts firing BBs at them, they know it's time to scatter. So Zeb gets paid for this work. All of his household chores he does for free. All of the boys do. The parents think it's only fair to pay the boys for the farm labor, though, because they would have to hire someone otherwise, probably more than one person, to do the labor that they do. Hanging out with Zeb was a lesson for me, a reminder that our kids are capable of way more than we think they are. Now, not all of you with homes in Buckhead can have dairy cows in your backyard. I understand that. You can have gardens, right? The kids can be responsible for. There are lots of things that they can do in terms of landscaping and lawn maintenance. But if you're looking for something else, something big and substantial, an important life skill that you sort of take for granted that you have to do yourself or hire somebody else to do, think about dinner. One of the most edifying things I've done with my daughter recently, and this happened totally by accident, is that we've been watching Master Chef Junior. How many of you have been watching that with your kids or grandkids? Yeah, so the deal here, right, it's like one of these cooking competition shows, and these 8 and 10 and 12-year-olds get into the kitchen and sort of mix it up with Gordon Ramsay as the judge and some of his sidekicks. And the kids make the most incredible meals. And to me, the moral of that story was clear, and I figured it out from my daughter's reaction to it, which, her reaction after watching some of these shows was, I can do that. And she can. These kids should be making us dinner. Right? I mean, their tastes are not that complicated. Spaghetti, lasagna, chicken breasts, hamburgers, whatever it is that they like to eat. This is not complicated stuff to make. With a couple of weeks of training in, knife skills and, being careful of the oven and, sort of responsible food safety tips, they can totally take this on. And they should do it for free because it's the right thing to do for your family, because you love them. All right, spending, saving. What this is really about is helping kids learn the difference between wants and needs. I like to illustrate this with rain boots. Every time I turned around in the reporting for this book, I would see these hunter boots. Is anybody wearing them tonight? I hope I'm not embarrassing anyone. I know there was some rain predicted at one point, but I kept hearing about these boots. Everywhere I went, all of the girls seemed to want them. They're probably the most expensive rain boots you can buy for a child, $70, $80, $90. Seems like an extravagance for some. For many of the kids, it was sort of the must-have fashion thing. And so I thought, okay, well, this is a good way to teach kids the difference between wants and needs. You can put those expensive rain boots all the way over on the want side of the continuum, and all the way over on the left, you can put the generic rain boots, the wellies, the $20 boots that you might get at Target or Payless. And you as a parent have to decide where you draw your line between want and need. In other words, what are you willing to spend for this thing that they need? In this category, in my house, we draw the Land's End line. I grew up in the Midwest, I'm wearing a Land's End shirt now. It's a great company, high quality products, nice return policy, those really nice ladies in Wisconsin on the telephone who you get to talk to. Yeah, great stuff, right? So at Land's End, the rain boots for kids cost like $45, and so that's what we pay. And if she wants something that's more expensive, more extravagant, as long as it's not from a brand that's on our banned item list, she can have it, but she's got to pay the difference between the $45 it would cost at Land's End and whatever it is that her item costs. And then and only then do we see just how much they want it. Yeah, we could afford the hunter boots within reason, but a part of what we're doing here with each and every time we reach into our wallet, we're teaching them something, or we're trying to at least, about what we stand for, about how to make grown-up decisions, about what it means to make trade-offs. And we're training them to make sort of ever larger decisions with money that is their own, so that they're ready to start making the big ones when it's time to go to college and beyond. So this is a big part of it. You can do it in every category of spending. So I told you these hunter boots kept coming up. One of the very first talks I gave about kids and money, there was a mother sitting in the front row, raised her hand, looked at me. She said, we've got a problem in my house. There was a question I could not answer. My husband was stumped. I was stumped. So here's the deal. The 11-year-old boy comes to us 2 days ago, and he said, I don't understand why you will not let me have a carnivorous plant terrarium. because you buy hunter boots for my 14-year-old sister. She said, what were we supposed to say to him? And I said, well, I think he's got you backed into a corner here because these two things are not in the same category, right? Carnivorous plant terrarium, that's a tool for learning, right? Botany, plant science, hydrology, insects, animal behavior, and this is all great stuff. You know, the kid wanted to build it and watch it and learn from it. And hunter boots are a luxury product. Not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily, within reason, but these are completely different categories of things. So I said, look, if yours is the sort of family that regularly buys tools for learning, if you buy, books, lots of books, if you buy musical instruments as long as they practice or don't break them, I said, I think you should buy them as Venus flytrap already. But I would suggest to you that after you stake him to his first round of flies, that if he wants to sort of masochistically watch them die, he should pay for the rest of the insects himself. So that was the deal we cut. Hunter boots, wants, needs. You can talk about them in almost every category of spending that there is in your household. Okay, so that give jar. It's there because we want them to learn to exercise their ever-developing muscles and natural instincts towards generosity. Kids can conceptualize this stuff at ages way younger than we think. This is a drawing that was made by a 6-year-old in Queens, New York. She'd come home one day and she had all of these pressing questions for her parents about these people she saw on the street in Manhattan with the signs. This was right when the Occupy movement was in sort of full force. She couldn't really read or understand the signs yet. She wanted to know what the big to-do was about. Her parents, they actually had a pretty good answer for her, for a 6-year-old. They said, well, there are many people in New York City who have a lot of money, who have way more than just about everybody else. And then there are a lot of people, many more in New York City, who don't have enough or only have enough just to pay for a small apartment and for food and clothing and not very many other extra things. And so what everybody's talking about right now with those signs is whether that's fair. And if it's not fair, what should we do about it? So she took that in and she sat down at her art table and she made a share machine. This is how the share machine works. So you take all of your gold, right? You pour it into the top of the pink funnel. This is exactly how she narrated it to me when I met her. She said, and all of the gold swirls into the pink funnel, and it goes down into the belly of the machine, and the gold is turned into red coins and blue coins, and when the coins are done, the pink elephant tusk shoots the coins out onto the ground, and then they land on the ground, and anybody who needs money can take it. That's the sharing machine. So, she understood redistribution better than almost any Democratic politician that I can think of. And she was ready to do something about it at the age of 6. Age 7, they're working through these issues too. This was on the wall one day at my daughter's hippie Quaker school in Brooklyn. I thought, wow, people should not have to pay higher taxes. That's a really bold thing for a Quaker school to have on the wall. So because I'm a professional busybody, I took a picture of it and I sent it to the kids' parents. I said, what is going on here? And they said, we have no idea. So I left it alone, but a couple weeks later I heard back from them. They said, Ron, we think we figured it out. I said, we were going through his room, sort of picking up the books and cleaning things up, and we think we found the book that gave him this idea. Can any of you guess what he might have been reading about?
The American Revolution?
Yeah, Boston, the Tea Party, right? So, his problem wasn't with taxes or even higher taxes. He just didn't want to pay higher taxes to the British. So all was fine at the Brooklyn Friends School. I guess his teacher may have figured that out, and that was the reason why they left it up there in the first place. So, again, they're thinking, they're processing, they're trying to figure out what this stuff means. And just to test this, we tried a relatively sophisticated concept on our 8-year-old. We decided, after a couple years of her practicing with her give jar, of her giving money to her school and her giving money to a hearing loss, a hearing research organization. Her cousin is hearing impaired. She's given money to support animal welfare. So she was kind of exercising her muscles, but we realized that we hadn't really let her in on any of the giving that we were doing. She had no knowledge of it, no role, no stake. That did not seem right to us. And so we sat down with her one day. We said, Talia, we want to tell you how we divide the money that we give away to other people ourselves. We, in effect, emptied out our give jar in front of her and put all of the money into piles. We actually used black beans, but you can use pennies or dollar bills or whatever you want. And so we put it all on the kitchen table, and there it was. We proceeded to explain it to her. We give a lot of money to support the eradication of river blindness. It's an opportunity for us with just $1,000 or $1,500 to actually save a single life. They've proven that that little money is actually enough to save somebody's life somewhere very far away, people who have nothing, a disease that's pretty easy to prevent if only they have those sort of right medicines and the right hygiene. So we felt like that was an important statement to make for our family. But our daughter had no knowledge of it. She didn't know how much money we were giving to the educational institutions that supported me. She did not know how much money we were giving to our synagogue. She didn't know how much money we were giving to food for hungry people in our community. She didn't know about our support of the American Jewish World Service and the organizations in New York City that help elderly Jews like her great-grandmother, the Holocaust survivor, who is still alive and going to the Catskills on her own every summer. She didn't know about any of that stuff. And so we showed her this. We said, okay, Talia, so this is how we do it. Do you have any questions about this? Or is there anything that you think is missing? So she sort of sized up the piles, and she looked it up to see if we were serious. She said, I'm really glad we give money to the schools that help Daddy when he didn't have enough. She said, but the thing that I love doing the most each year is going to sleepaway camp. She said, now, I'd like to give money to our camp so that if there are kids who don't have enough money to go, that we will be able to help them. So we had not thought of that. We didn't even know if such a fund existed. But we called up the camp, and sure enough, there it was. And so we made a pile for the Eisner Scholarship Fund, and we let her take 3 beans, 3% of our giving budget, and reallocate it. And so she made those choices, and it was such an interesting conversation to kind of see where she stood and how she felt about how we were positioning our family, our values, that we vowed to do it each and every year. We're about to do it again next month in July when we go on vacation. This time she's going to get 5 beans. Every year we expect to give her a couple of more. It's only fair, right? Because what we give and how we divide that pie says a lot about what we stand for, about what our values are, what we care about, what moves us most. And from there, it's only one short step to gratitude. Many of you have probably seen the gratitude rituals going around on Facebook in the last year or two. I have one of my own that's proven to be incredibly powerful in my own life, following from a lot of social science that's come out in the last 10 years, proving that regular expressions of gratitude, both in grown-ups and children, lead to all sorts of happiness benefits, positive impacts on mental health and even physical health. I started adopting my own ritual every time the subway comes in the morning. I mean, I'm always glad when the F train finally comes. But the headlights in the tunnel gives me the signal that it's time to drop my head for just 1 second and think about 3 things that happened in the last 24 hours that were really incredible. Even on the worst of days, there's almost always 3 things that you can come up with that brighten them at least a little bit. I'm probably a 25% happier person than I was when I started that 3 years ago. The stuff is really powerful, and I think we should do it as families, too. So, yours may be a family of faith. Maybe you have a regular grace saying ritual at your dinner or breakfast table, or you do it once a week at Sabbath. If yours happens to be a godless family, that's fine. Atheists are welcome at the gratitude table, too. One of the most fun things for kids to do, something that they really enjoy a lot, is toasting. Right? It's kind of a grown-up ritual. You clink the glasses together. It's loud and raucous, the little body, the liquid sloshes everywhere. And there's no real rule except that everybody has to go around and talk about at least one thing that's great. Right? It can be a person. It can be a stranger. It can be something in nature, a piece of music that they heard for the first time or hadn't heard in a while that made them happy. Just something to be grateful for. The more we do that, the more it tilts us away from thinking a lot about the things that we don't have, that we wish we could have, that might be just out of reach for now or maybe forever, and thinking more about the amazing things that persist in our lives. And it's powerful. Does anybody recognize this place? Every month or so, I run into somebody in a crowd like this that knows exactly where this is, and they literally get up, almost as if it were magic, and they talk for the next 5 minutes and say the same 5 things that I was planning to say. So let me introduce you to Pine Island Summer Camp. So as I was mentioning before, my daughter goes to sleepaway camp. She started going after first grade, which may seem a little extreme. She was actually angry that the camp wouldn't let her go after kindergarten. That's how excited she was to go. I think sleepaway camp is a really powerful experience for kids, particularly kids of means. It's an opportunity to strip away all of the things that surround them during the year, the electronica and the air conditioning and the teachers and the after-school administrators and the coaches and the parents who are trying so hard to sort of smooth everything over and cultivate this incredible, enriching environment for them, and go someplace where none of that is happening, where things are extremely stripped down, and they have an opportunity to think about whether all of that stuff is really necessary. And so I went looking for the sort of perfect example of that, the kind of camp where there is no running water. The kids bathe in the lake for all of the passing boaters to see. They've learned to avert their eyes there. Where they sleep in open-sided canvas tents with flaps that roll down. Where they don't even have doors in the bathrooms. Now, this is an all-boys camp. I'm not sure this would fly at a girls' camp, although it could, in theory. This is what they refer to as the perch on Pine Island. It's an elevated platform, beautiful view of the lake. It's the largest composting toilet I have ever seen in my life. It's the very first place they take you when you take a tour of Pine Island. The camp is on a 2.5-acre island on the middle of a lake in the middle of the state of Maine. And the boys love taking you in there. Inevitably, there's somebody sitting there, or 2 or 3 kids if it's a full house, and they wave hello at you, right? You wave hello at them. And they say, would you like to use the bathroom? You say, actually, I'll wait till you're done, it's there for shock value, but there's something else going on here, too. And when I asked Ben Swan, the director of the camp, what was going on here, what this was about, here's what he said to me. He was talking about New Canaan, Connecticut. Upper middle class suburb, sends a lot of kids to Pine Island over the years. But New Canaan could just as easily be, Park Slope in Brooklyn, or Buckhead, or Highland Park, Illinois, or Palo Alto, or, name your favorite upper middle class suburb or community. He said, the problem with New Canaan is that nobody needs you in New Canaan. But here on the island, where we have nothing, no power, no water, barely any buildings, certainly no electronics or electric ski boats or spring-loaded aerobics floors or barns full of horses. The only fun is the fun that we make together. And if we're not all in it, it's not as much fun. And that, to me, is the lesson of overnight camp. These things that you can do together with your peers, with your fellow 8 and 10 and 12 and 14-year-olds, are just as spectacular as the entertainment, the enrichment you can get from your teachers and from your peers, all during the school year. It's a good thing to try with your kids if you haven't already. Pretty much all of them end up thriving and enjoying the experience. So there are other ways to remove kids from what surrounds them during the school year. You can take them on vacations to places where waiters in uniforms bring them frozen, frosty drinks with umbrellas in them and straws and serve them to them poolside on the edge of the graduated swimming pool. This is all very nice. I've been to places like this with my daughter. They're perfectly lovely. But I started thinking about vacations differently when I met a couple of years ago. In fact, we met sitting beside a swimming pool, not unlike that one. We were talking about the work that I was doing. They told me a story. This is a couple who was essentially self-made. One of them grew up in Queens, the other one in Staten Island, working class families. They'd really made it big. The dad was a private equity partner. The mom was a lawyer in a very fancy law firm. They lived on Park Avenue the whole bit. And one day at the breakfast table, they overheard the 10-year-old boy and the 13-year-old girl talking, reminiscing about their vacations. And what they were doing was comparing the various poolside amenities of all of the Four Seasons resorts that they had been to. The frozen Evian spray bottle here, and the, handmade artisanal fruit pop there, and the chocolate-covered strawberries at the third place, and the cold washcloth. And these parents wanted to vomit. I said, what have we done here? So they made a decision right then and there that they were going to change things radically. Now, interestingly, they did not stop going to the Four Seasons. These parents work incredibly hard. They only get 2 weeks a year off. They want things to be perfect. They were not willing to sacrifice that. But they started sending their kids away with the Staten Island and the Queens relatives once or twice a year, too. And those relatives, they vacation very differently. They get in the car. They drive long distances. They stay in motels. They go to national parks. And after a year or two of that, their kids confessed to them that they liked those trips better than the Four Seasons trips. The parents said, oh, well, why is that? Feeling very pleased that this experiment had worked. And their son said to them, well, when we go to the motel, he said, if I'm thirsty and I want a soda, I just put $1 in a vending machine. And out it comes, and I open it up, and it's fizzy, and it explodes, and I drink it, and I'm not thirsty anymore. When I'm with you guys, I have to ask somebody in a uniform if I want a Coke. And then they bring it on a tray, with a piece of paper that I have to sign, and then it costs $10, and you guys get mad at me. So I named a rule after them. I call it the Four Seasons rule, which just says that, for every vacation that you can afford to take, like that one, do it, right? Spending money on experiences is a great way to make memories. But think also about whether there might be an opportunity to take a very different kind of trip, or send them on a different kind of trip with other relatives or friends who vacation very differently, who see different things, who go different places. This, too, can help strip away some of what surrounds them during the rest of the year and make them think about their lives a little bit differently. All right, so you probably have a lot of conversations about these in your house, about when they're going to get them, what they're going to get, under what circumstances, who pays for the upgrade, and when, and whether they get the hand-me-downs or whether they get a new one. These conversations go on a lot. One way to show them who's boss is to give them your version 1 iPhone with the wireless carrier that doesn't exist anymore. It's like a really fun prank with the little ones. So I actually think the cell phone rule is pretty simple. As much as we may think it's ridiculous, given what we had to put up with waiting for the landlines 20 or 30 years ago, I think cell phones, voice service, text service even, is a need now for kids, not a want. It's just how people communicate. We want to be in touch with them, too. They're texting each other. Their coaches are texting them. I think we have sort of begrudgingly come to the conclusion that this is just the way of the world. So, they get the basic phone with the basic keyboard and texting service when they're in 5th or 6th or 7th grade or whenever it is that they start wandering around by themselves. But if they want a smartphone, if they want data service, that should be on them. It's a want. It's not something they need for the most part. So That makes it simple, right? If they want it, they're going to have to pay for the difference between whatever you'd pay for the basic dumb phone with the texting and the keyboard and whatever fancy iPhone or whatever else they want. And that will come out of their allowance, or will come out of their birthday money or their holiday money. And then you'll know how much they really want it. They will have made the trade-off themselves, and they will feel good about it. So the question of the phone, I think, is a simple one to address. The question of what they actually see and do on those phones, especially if they upgrade or if they're using their iPads or laptops at home, is a whole other question entirely. Do any of you know who these kids are? These are actual kids on an actual private jet with an actual cabin steward in the background. It's not stock photography. They appear to be on their way to ski somewhere. I have not yet figured out who they are, but one day I would like to meet their parents, try and figure out how it came to pass that, you know, the picture of the kids on the private jet ended up floating around the internet. Some of you may be familiar with a similar incident that happened with Michael Dell's children. You would think Dell, of all people, with all of his technology expertise, could keep his kids' pictures of themselves on the various Dell jets off the internet, but no, his kids were using Instagram to post these pictures of themselves on the various jets all over the internet. This got out in a big way. It went viral. It was extremely embarrassing for the parents. If you are lucky enough to fly private, good for you. I am jealous. But have your kids turn the phones off when they are on the plane. I can't tell you the number of parents I've heard from in affluent communities who have said to me, if I see another photo of a kid on a private jet on my kid's Instagram feed, I'm going to break the phone in half and smash it on the ground. People find this upsetting, and I don't think it's just jealousy, although there might be some of that. I think all of us would love to be able to fly private. Maybe some of you do, which is great. But I think people are worried that their kids, their impressionable children who are just, you know, sort of exploring media on their own for the first time, are going to come to expect, to think that, you know, this is normal or normal in their circles, and that there is something wrong with them if they don't have it. I mean, the junior varsity of this is what a lot of kids see on their Instagram feeds these days. I think it's an engine of envy, basically. It's like a catalog of awesome. You know, here's my awesome friends, here's the awesome vacation that I'm on, here's the awesome food that I'm cooking, and the party that I'm at that you were not invited to, and you are home with your nose pressed up against the phone or the iPad glass, and I literally want you to like it. Right? I want you to push the thumbs up button on Instagram. I want you to regram it. I want you to be my follower and watch this highlight reel that I have curated just for your 13 and 15 and increasingly 11-year-old eyes so that we can all have what amounts to a contest of awesome. Who has the most awesome life? You know, we all worry about what our kids see on television. Our parents worried about what we watch. I think this is the most pernicious form of media aimed at children that has ever existed in human history. Which is not to say that we should ban it. I'm not a big believer in banning things. But in the same way that you might try and get between your kids and a really nasty commercial that, you know, reinforces all sorts of terrible gender or social class stereotypes, I think we should be keeping a very close eye on this sort of thing, or whatever the junior varsity version of it is in your community. Because kids, impressionable kids, may come to think that this sort of thing is normal, something they should aspire to or feel badly about that they don't, if they don't have it. And the fact of the matter is that it is not reality. But it will cause them to ask a lot of questions. So I want to remind you again, this curiosity that they have about money, about your money, about money in the world, it is natural. We are in the grown-up making business here, and money is a big part of grown-up life. Money is a source of power and mystery, and so it's only developmentally appropriate and natural that they are going to ask about it. And it's our job to answer honestly, to answer in a way that opens up avenues of exploration, of communication, And even if change, right here in the audience, we have the best example of that I can possibly think of. When Hannah Selwyn sat at the median wondering why somebody would choose to have a really nice car when if that person had a lesser car, that the person in the median asking for change might actually have some place to live. When she asked that question of her parents, when she pressed that question at the dinner table, when they did not shut her down, it changed their lives completely. And I'm here to tell you that these questions can change your lives too, and make all of our family lives that much richer. Thank you. So I have many other acts of long-form journalism I intend to commit in this general area of money and families and values. If you want to hear about them first, you can head to ronlieber.com right now. It'll only take you 10 seconds. Just drop your first name and email address in, and I will keep you posted on what I'm doing next. But for now, we've left a bunch of time for questions, and so by all means, fire away. Right here in the front. All right, we get two from the same household. I love it.
I'm sure there's a long answer, but I'm curious about the Save Jar. In your model, is that indefinite future, or can the kids dip into that for they meet certain criteria?
Yeah, so it depends on the age of the kids. The young ones have trouble with the kind of longer term time horizons. I think in general, if the kids are under 8 or 9 or so, you want to stick to a goal that's no more than 6 to 12 months away, because after that they start to lose interest. You can do a couple things to help them along. You can put a picture, like a visual reminder of the thing that they want on the Save Jar, so it helps them kind of keep their eyes on the prize, literally. You can take the money out, you can count it every once in a while. You can also offer incentives, matching contributions of various sorts to sort of help them along the way. I mean, we grown-ups often get them in the workplace. We get what is in effect a matching contribution from the government in the form of a tax deduction or a tax credit, depending on who we are and how we're saving. So I think we can do that too to help, speed things up a little bit, at least for the younger ones, to sort of get them going. With the older ones, I think it depends on the goal and on your family situation. For some families, who could afford to buy their kids a new car when they turn 16 or 17, and could afford to pay full freight for college, they may still decide to say to their 12-year-olds that if you want a car, or if you want anything other than this sort of baseline safety feature laden but 6-year-old vehicle that we are willing to buy you, you're going to have to save for it and pay for that upgrade yourself. I spoke with one family when I was writing this book that decided that even though they had the means to send all 4 of their kids to private college, that they were going to have each and every one of those 4 kids pay for the first semester of tuition, not room and board, but tuition themselves. So the kids got that talking to at the beginning of their freshman year in high school, and they had 4 summers to do it, and they did it. Scooping ice cream, umpiring softball games, scrubbing toilets at the beach, and eventually they got their lifeguard certificates, and they did it, right? So their Save Jars were essentially spoken for. So I think it depends on your family, but you can use it to teach a lot of lessons and reinforce a whole bunch of really valuable things. Mm-hmm.
So you talked a lot about the example of the hunter boots, and my question is, I have a 4-year-old who already sees things in my closet that she wants, and obviously it's not a boot. But how do you answer that question when your child says, well, why do you get to have an iPhone 6 and I don't? Or
yeah, so I'm actually not anti-brand, and I don't mean to be a scold. And I think it's interesting that you have, your reflex right away is to, she sees things in my closet that obviously she can't have. My guess is that, but she could. But, you know, there are pint-sized versions of most of the things in your closet, right? So it's not that they can't have hunter boots. Or, you know, we've all seen the, you know, they make Burberry print, you know, the tartan skirts for the Burberry print skirts for babies now. You know, I've seen those in some of the, you know, finer precincts of New Jersey. And, you know, I wonder, right? But, you know, here's my feeling about this. You know, there are some things that we want to, that we need to as parents, to put on our banned item list. And every family has their own, right? Maybe your family doesn't believe in violent video games, or doesn't want their daughters wearing Victoria's Secret underwear, or, you know, no double piercing, or heels above 2 inches, or, you know, whatever it is. But, you know, if fancy clothes per se, if nice clothes are not on your banned item list, especially when she gets older and she has the ability to make these decisions herself, I think she should have the opportunity to reach for them, because you know, it's going to take a while for a lot of the more expensive stuff. She's going to have to make really big trade-offs and sacrifice other things if you're doing allowance right and you're giving her just enough so she can have a few of those things, but not enough so that she doesn't have to make a lot of really hard choices. And then she'll learn whether something like that is worth it, whether that brand name makes her feel so good that she's decided that it was worth sacrificing a whole bunch of other things. I actually think that's a muscle that we would like her to exercise. But I think you were also asking about hypocrisy, right? It's like, how come you get to have it, but I don't? And the answer to that question is, you know, I make my choices based on the money that we have available and spending it responsibly. Hopefully that's what you do. And our job is to make sure that you have just enough money to learn to make your own choices. And we will buy you the things that you need, but that thing that you're asking for, that latest iPhone, you know, the fancy boots, or whatever it is that she's lusting after in your closet, you know, especially when she turns 12 and 14 and 16 and she wants to actually borrow the things or take them or buy the same ones in the same size. Those are not needs, right? Those are wants, and you can make your own decision about which ones you pay for, but, you know, we're going to pay for the things that you need and not the things that you want. Mm-hmm. Joan?
Ron, I'm curious about whether you are familiar with any research or experience that you have about the differences in the way that boys and girls think about or learn about money.
Yeah, this is a real pet peeve of mine. So there's a whole bunch of research out there, and I say this as the father of one girl and another one coming in September. When you ask teenagers about the conversations that they have with their parents, a number of surveys have turned up pretty much identical results. What you find is that boys have more conversations with their parents about nearly every financial topic than girls do. It's not by a huge margin, but it's measurable. You know, 80% to 70% or 70% to 60%. The gap is always 10 percentage points. It's a meaningful difference. Parents are talking to their boys about money more than they are talking to their girls. The only thing that they talk to their girls about more than they talk to the boys is philanthropy. So, you know, it's great to talk a lot about philanthropy, but this feels gendered to me, and it feels problematic, because the net result of these conversations, or lack thereof, is that when you ask those same teenagers what they're earning now, as in their teen jobs, what they expect to earn as entry-level workers, and what they think that they will earn as mid-career employees of some or another organization someday, inevitably, the response is that they will earn 30% less than the boys think that they will earn. So something is going very wrong in what we think is our sort of gender equalized, you know, fully progressive, really thoughtful households. We're still getting it wrong by a factor of 10 percentage points, by a factor of 30%, in ways that are disturbing to me as the father of girls. And so I would ask you to think about the girl or the girls in your household. If they are not curious about money, doesn't mean that your job is done or that you're off the hook. What it means is that there's probably a gender gap forming in their minds in your household, and closing it is your responsibility. Thank you for asking. Other questions? All right, let me ask you guys something then. Why don't you tell me what the craziest question your kids have ever asked you about money, and I'll give you advice on how you might have answered it. Or you can tell me how you answered it, or how you wished you would have answered it. Anyone want to volunteer one? Come on, are all of your kids completely silent on this topic?
Like one of our family jokes is my 3-year-old son in the back of the car, in the car seat. One of the days says, "Mom, yes, what's our salary?" And I think I started with, well, actually, it's that's my salary, and whatever. But then that's sort of a family joke. And I positively handled it according to your phone.
It's so interesting that he used the word "our," like as if it belonged to him somehow. See, he already gets the family business is his business, right?
The other thing, he's because it's kind of became a family joke a few years later, he said it was because he'd been playing the game of life with his sisters, and there's a salary card. So, and that was sort of like how the question got in his head, which actually, the game of life is a pretty good game for unexpected things happen, your salary goes up, your salary goes down, and it kind of models some of the
right. Yeah, that would have been a good moment for why do you ask, right? Because then he could have diverted the conversation. Well, what do people earn in the game of life? What do you think a high salary is? To me, the right answer to that question for a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old even is this. We actually think that you're entitled to that information. We want to provide it to you, but not until you're ready. We think it's important for you to know this because you're going to be making some really big decisions about where to go to school, maybe taking on debt, or making career decisions or decisions about what to study that are kind of based on where you're going to go to school. These are enormous decisions, and we want you to understand, to have some context for what it's like, what it takes to live the life, whatever life, that you've been able to provide for them. And so the hope is that by 17 or 18, they're ready to take that information in. But there's a whole process that goes into that, right? And it starts around 3 or 4 or 5, with the allowance and the jars. And you sort of take them along the path of, years of practice with that money, maybe ever increasing amounts. You turn over the whole clothing budget to them at 9 or 10. You put them in charge of groceries, maybe, or the electric bill. You start introducing them to all of the components of where your income goes in any given month. They learn about insurance and everything else that, kind of goes into the money that you spend and the budget that you have. And then once they know about all of those sort of basic facts of financial life, what you really want is to test their discretion. Because I think that's what most parents worry about, that the kids will blab or brag or say something inappropriate to a relative or, something that's embarrassing. And so again, they're asking you at 12 or they're asking at 14. You say, look, you haven't proven to me that you're discreet, that you can keep private information private, and so I am watching you carefully, and it's going to be a couple years before you're ready. And in the meantime, we're going to be sure that you are not getting into trouble with your friends for, violating their privacy, for spreading their secrets, for engaging in gossip. And, if you pass that one, if you clear that hurdle, we're going to make sure that you're not reading your siblings' diaries or tattling on them in inappropriate ways. We're going to make sure that you're not repeating things that you heard at the dinner table here to your friends in ways that are inappropriate. And then, and only then, are we going to sit you down, show you our tax returns, and explain it all. But that's going to come with its own warning, which is this, right? We're telling you these things. We think that they're important. We think you're grown up enough at this point, mature enough to understand it. But you should know that if you go out and repeat this information to other people, they're going to think you're a jerk. Right? They're going to think you're a braggart. And no adolescent who cares a lot about their self-image is going to want to flunk the jerk test. So at that point, and only then, and not a 3 for sure, are they ready for your salary. Yes?
My daughter, with her first summer job, said, "Who is Thicka and why are they thinking?" I'm not prepared her about taxes and withholdings.
Yeah, and why would you think of it, right? It's like who remembers back to their first paycheck and that there were taxes taken out and whatever. That was a great lesson for her, right? Talking about taxes and how much we pay and what they go for. This is meaty, important stuff. And I try to remind my daughter on a pretty regular basis of the things that tax dollars pay for, just so when she gets her first check, she won't resent it. So something else along those lines. When I was out trying to sell this book, I was meeting with a bunch of publishers in New York, and as I was walking out, one of the editors at one of these publishing houses took me aside, and they said, "You're not going to believe this, but I just had a 22-year-old editorial assistant come into my office the other day and burst into tears because nobody had ever told her that 30% of her starting salary was going to be taken out for taxes. She didn't know. She didn't learn it in high school. She didn't learn it in college. She did not learn it in orientation. And she did not learn it in school. And she had set up a whole budget in life for herself based on this salary, and she had no earthly idea about FICA. So it's good that your kid has learned it now.
This is a question. We have a 14, a 12-year-old, and a 7-year-old. None of them have ever been on allowance, and it's something we've always wanted to do, but it's really the confusing aspect of managing it. But when we think about it, and maybe it's different for different ages, but what should it include? Because there's also things they want to buy for friends for birthday presents, and I don't know, you want to teach them to be generous with that too, and I honestly would love to know a set amount that I could give them each month and have them divide it.
I wish it were that simple, but I think the more responsibility they're interested in having or you're interested in shoving onto them, the better. I think we want to sort of push them 1 or 2 steps ahead of what we think they're ready for, just because the spectacular mistakes that they will make, well, first of all, they're really fun to watch. I mean, it's like, FICA, right? It's just like you can't make this stuff up. But these lessons, these mistakes, this confusion, these discoveries, they're priceless, right? And we want them to have those experiences and learn those things now while they are still under our roofs. And those mistakes are not ultimately going to cost them very much, right? So, your 14-year-old, you could sit down in July and write out a bunch of want-need continuums and figure out a clothing budget for everything that 14-year-old needs. You could think about the number of birthday gifts they bought last year, set a reasonable budget, include that in their sort of annual budget. You could do the same thing with athletic equipment they might need or other things for other extracurricular activities. And you could hand it all over in a lump sum at the beginning of the year. So they have a whole 12 months that they have to make it last. And then you let them make their own decisions and make their own trade-offs and see what happens, because this is what it's going to be like for them as college students and as grown-ups, and we want them to be ready. I mean, one of the reasons I wrote this book was that I just felt like it was important to kind of reinforce and to train in these habits, because so much has changed now in terms of the amount of responsibility that we heap onto 17 and 18 and 22 and 23-year-olds, right? These kids are in the driver's seats for 6-figure decisions about college and 5-figure, like high 5-figure in many cases, decisions about how much student loan debt to take on. They have no experience of debt. They've barely even purchased a bicycle before. And then we're signing them up for $10,000 or $20,000 of student loan debt each year. It's obscene. It literally makes no sense, right? And then they graduate at 22 or 23. They're required to buy health insurance. Nobody tells them how. Even the 46-year-olds can't figure out how to use these exchanges, right? So, this is something that we foisted onto them. And they are, basically singularly responsible now for saving for their own retirements. Nobody's going to help them with that anymore. And how are they supposed to know how to do any of this? And yet you can't afford to lose your 20s anymore. And we all know the kind of laws of compound interest and the importance of saving early. So, you know, they have to be ready, and nobody's going to make them ready except for us. So start with something, you know, and you can grow from there if it feels intimidating to do it all at once for all of them.
Thank you so much. Let's give Ron another big round of applause. So I'm Stacy Lynch, and I'm a philanthropic advisor at the Community Foundation, and I'm just going to wrap us up tonight. Please remember, we do have a copy of Ron's signed book out front. We do ask that one per family or couple. And, you know, so many good things. I'm in the midst of raising little people, and I'm excited, Ron, to implement the gratitude toast. I thought that was a great tip, and so many wonderful things. As Alicia mentioned at the top of our evening, please also, there's information on the Community Foundation. We encourage you to take that with you, and thank you so much for being with us here tonight. We do have some dessert for you to partake of too as you leave. So with that, I'll close you out, and I wish everyone a safe trip home, and thank you, Keith and Jerry, for having us.